welcome to Arts Express. This is Prairie Miller, and on the show.
In my heart, I no longer believe that I have a realistic path to electoral victory. The chronic disease crisis was one of the primary reasons for my running for president, along with ending censorship in the Ukraine war. It's the reason I've made the heart-wrenching decision to suspend my campaign and to support President Trump. We are aligned on many key issues. In those meetings, he suggested that we join forces as a unity party.
Robert Kennedy Jr. on his revelations about why and how he's suspending his presidential campaign and joining forces with Trump, and what it has to do with Democrats not so pro-choice after all, at least when it comes to censorship and sidelining of the competition. Kennedy's running mate Nicole Shanahan shares the dreaded details on the Rick Sanchez Direct Impact show, and while debating the impact of Kennedy joining up with Trump, Sanchez and co-host Manila Tingnan disagree.
Hey, Rick Sanchez here. This is Direct Impact, and this is what we're going to be talking about. RFK Jr.'s running mate explains how the Democrats pushed him away and apparently into Mr. Trump's loving arms. You're going to hear it for yourself. I'm Rick Sanchez. Let's do this. All right, RFK Jr. Obviously, his uncle was the president. His father would have been president had he not been shot. A prominent member of one of the most famous Democratic families in U.S. history. He's going to quit the race and endorse Donald Trump. And to hear his running mate tell it, it's happening because he's been treated so poorly, she says, by the Democratic Party.
This DNC-aligned PAC that was created specifically to take us out has spent millions of dollars to take us out. They have unfortunately turned us into a spoiler. And we don't want to be a spoiler. We wanted to win. We wanted a fair shot. The DNC made that impossible for us. They have banned us, shadow banned us, kept us off stages, manipulated polls, used lawfare against us, sued us in every possible state. They've even planted insiders into our campaign to disrupt it and to create actual legal issues for us.
So let's talk about this. Obvious question. Will he endorse Trump, and what's he going to get for doing so? These things always have a price, right? There is talk of a cabinet position, but it's not firmed up yet. Why is he out? Why is he out? Money, time, and a drop in poll numbers? Possibly. Who's he going to really help in this, right? The obvious answer would seem to be Donald Trump, because he's going to endorse Donald Trump. But it ain't automatic, you know what I mean? It depends on how he sells it and how Mr. Trump sells it. Remember, his followers tend to dislike both parties, right? So convincing them to make that jump is going to be kind of hard. And it may even help Harris, because aligning with Trump could anger some of his followers who don't want him to align with anybody. This is quite a pickle here, you know? Manila, this whole thing is probably going to work itself out. It's going to be fun to watch it. No, what are your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely, it's going to be fun to watch. But to Nicole Shanahan's point, she's absolutely right. The Democratic side of this, political show that we have here in the United States has been proven over and over that while that particular party stands, they say, for pro-choice when it comes to women's rights, they're not so pro-choice when it comes to the ballot box. And we've seen how they've treated RFK Jr., which is why he jumped ship. They were not going to allow that wing, if we can call it that, of the Democrats to actually be successful or have a real chance at being on the DNC ticket in the primaries, because we didn't even see a primary for the Democrats. So to her point, she's absolutely right. She's pulling the veil back on how it's actually done. And now that he has gone independent, The numbers have gone down, Rick, steadily in decline since he left the party. But a lot of the polls do show that if people were poached, we'll call it that, because I don't believe people are, should or have to vote one party or the other. But if theoretically, if he were poaching from anybody, he'd be mostly poaching from Trump voters, because the people that are on the Democratic side have already drank the Kool-Aid and they're going to vote blue no matter who. So the party he would have been hurting would have been the Republicans. In this case, it's Donald Trump. So for him to go and potentially, we don't know, potentially, square a deal behind closed doors somewhere, then, that's kudos to him, and that's great for Kennedy and the mission that he has and whatever that is. And so I think if he backs Trump, I think it'll actually help Trump, because it'll bring the people back to the Republican Party.
We disagree. I think he's going to end up having absolutely no effect, a minimal effect, or maybe even going the other way and helping Harris, because so many of those people are going to look at it as, the reason I was going to vote for you is because I didn't want to vote for Trump. So don't tell me what to do kind of thing. But we'll see. We'll see.
They hate Harris more than they hate Trump, I think, those particular voters.
Okay. There is starting to be some real bickering in the Democratic Party about how President Joe Biden was treated on the first night of the election. This is new. The president was supposed to give his final goodbye in prime time around 8 or 9 o'clock.
But guys, it's really getting late now, so let's wrap up the other speakers and bring out Joe.
Please welcome Congressman Jim Clyburn,
Raphael Warnock, Kathy Hochul, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Jamie Raskin, Jasmine Crockett, Chris Coons.
And I want to talk with you for just a few minutes.
Jesus Christ. Is this still going on? No disrespect to Chris Coons, but Chris Coons. It is almost midnight. Mom has got to get to bed. And you know who else has to get to bed? Joe Biden. For the love of God, let's hear from Biden.
Please welcome Ashley Biden.
Not that Biden.
That's good. Everybody's talking about it since it happened. He didn't even get on stage until the primetime audience was gone and they had all gone to bed. So most Americans didn't even get to see the President of the United States with his, farewell speech. Was it done on purpose? Well, Democratic convention officials say it happened because there were just too many long ovations and the night went long. Funny how that didn't happen when Mr. Obama spoke or when Mr. Clinton spoke afterward. The fact of the matter is the Democratic Party seems to be done with Mr. Biden. And while it may make sense from a political standpoint to try and win the election, to do so, to do it that way just seems a little harsh.
And now on Arts Express.
We all have one enemy. And that's President Snow. He corrupts everyone and everything. He turns the best of us against each other. Stop killing for him. Tonight, turn your weapons to the Capitol.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 76th Hunger Games.
And those were scenes from The Hunger Games, the anti-authoritarian dystopian thriller starring Natalie Dormer, the star as well of Game of Thrones, The Tudors, and Penny Dreadful, is our guest on the show to talk about her latest film, The Wasp, a class conflict psychological thriller in which Dormer and actress Naomi Harris, a pregnant blue-collar supermarket worker and middle-class housewife, respectively, both clash and collide in a conflict brimming with unresolved, lifelong tensions that may be said to foretell what has been going down in the raging class conflict in the UK at this moment in time. First, a scene from The Wasp, then Natalie Dormer.
Sorry, why did you want to meet?
Simon, he's lied and cheated. He's bullied me. I'm sure he treats the other women he sees just as badly.
So what do you want then?
What you did seemed to come so naturally to you.
Hello, Natalie, and welcome to our show.
Hi, Perry. Lovely to talk to you.
Now, what can you say about portraying a working-class woman in The Wasp? And did your experience at the beginning of your career as a waitress and out of work provided a connection for you to Carla? An experience you've described as an actress as, quote, being out of work for so long was the best lesson I could have ever had.
I mean, Carla is a very practical person. She's a very practical human being. She has to be, because she lives paycheck to paycheck. And I know that a lot of your listeners will know what that feels like. And there was a time in my life when I know what that feels like. And obviously Carla as a character has the added pressure of being a mother to 3 children with another on the way. I know that Morgan, the writer, was really looking to explore the socio-economic differences between Naomi Harris's character and mine, Heather and Carla. And I think, Carla feels boxed in. She accepts an offer without giving anything away. She accepts an offer from Heather because quite simply, she needs the money and she's got her back up against the wall and she feels like she does not have a choice. So, it feels very real to me, very human and very true in that way, the origins of her motivation and why she enters into talking to Heather.
And what are your thoughts about the class divisions at work in this film, contrasting you and Heather and lending that class aspect to the drama?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I do. I know, obviously, that's what Morgan was trying to achieve. She was trying to write a drama. She was trying to write a story that really looked at what unites people, but also what divides them. And they're desperate. Both of these women are desperate in different ways, I think is the way to put it. That's the origins of them both doing really extreme things. They've both got their backs up against the wall and they're both desperate. And again, and for Carla, that comes from, as you say, her economical situation. And so to me, that's just really truthful.
And how would you compare and contrast a working class woman in The Wasp with your portrayals of female nobility and approaching that differently?
Well, I think that's just the joy of being an actor, right? You get to play multiple lives for the price of one, and that's the joy of my job. Is I get to chameleon-esque try and make every character I play feel real and authentic, and that's the beauty. That's the beauty of the job.
And you once described yourself creatively as, quote, on the edge and really risky. Please elaborate, and in terms of your approach to The Wasp as well.
I do not remember saying that. Sorry.
Oh, it's on the internet.
But you now come now. You know better than to trust everything that is written on the internet. Come on, you know much better than that. Look, Actors are no different from any other human being. We evolve, we grow, we change. You don't want to hold someone to something they said 15 years ago. People, your values, your opinions, your life experiences alter you. So I don't remember saying that, but if I did, all I would say is, you know, we grow, we shift, and the jobs we take are informed by that growing that we do and evolving as a human. And, you know, I'm a mother now, and, you know, that I think that changes women. Well, it changes men too, of course it does. Let's not be sexist about it. It changes your perspective on the world. And I've had these two, the Wasp and the other movie I did around the same time, Audrey's Children, that was also at Tribeca. These are two jobs that I'm really proud of. They were my first jobs after becoming a mother. And I think I've been altered by that as well. You know, I think it's made me interested in different themes and different job opportunities because I've changed and grown, you know, in that direction. So I take one job at a time.
Was it in any way important to you personally as well as creatively in the Wasp for you to embrace this project?
Sure. I mean, the emotional investment is still very much there. I knew the writer, Morgan Lloyd Malcolm. The Wasp was a play before it was a screenplay, before it was a movie. And I knew Morgan from developing other projects with her a few years ago. And I had not seen the play, but I had read it. I knew what she was trying to achieve with this story. So I was very excited for her when I knew that they were going to make it into a film. And I was, you know, really, really touched when she asked me to be a part of it.
And you've described being a victim of bullying yourself in school, but, quote, still to this day can't explain why. So did immersing yourself in this film about bullying lend any personal insight, understanding, empowering, or healing for you of that traumatic experience?
It's definitely childhood trauma is obviously a major theme of this film, and the ramifications of that into later life. I actually know that Naomi Harris felt a really big pull regards the bullying element of it because she was badly bullied herself as a child. And for her, that was a major draw. For me, it was not so much specifically about bullying. It was just about two young girls being wronged. You know, both these characters, Heather and Carla, have been wronged in their childhoods. And then they also both feel betrayed by each other. So they're carrying a lot of baggage when we meet them. And what you've got is this fascinating exploration of female friendship, but you've got it in the fast-paced, like, entertaining ride of a psychological thriller.
And when Natalie Dormer looks in the mirror, what does she see?
It depends what day it is. Yeah, it's. I think you know, actors cheat. You know, we get to really explore different facets of ourselves and our past. And through storytelling, where we get to indulge in our imagination all the time. We're storytellers. It's a very it's a privileged life to be able to do that.
And do you feel that you approach portraying Carla differently as a mother and playing a mother in the film?
I do. Like I think I have. I think on a DNA level, becoming a mother has, I mean, obviously there's a practical level to that because there's a practical, I'm a working mum. And that's not just about being an actor. There's millions of women around the world and your listeners who are working mums. It brings a whole new dynamic to your life. But yes, I think it has altered my desires in my storytelling and the things I want to explore at this point in my life. You know, again, don't hold me to it again in 10 years' time. We all shift and shape and change. But Audrey's Children and The Wasp are both projects that, you know, I took and I was wearing them and living them through a new lens in having just attained motherhood. So it's an interesting journey. You know, it alters you as an artist.
And any last word about The Wasp to share with our listeners?
Yeah, enjoy the ride, because it is a ride. Because it's a great psychological thriller, and there aren't many films. There aren't many films that do what The Wasp does. It's to give two female characters this power play back and forth. There's not too many stories out there to watch like this.
Okay, thank you so much, Natalie Dormer, for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Good evening, listeners. My name's Jack Clark, and welcome to another segment of Arts Express. Today, we're traveling back in time to the mysterious world of the Knights Templar. My guest is historian Steve Tibble, whose latest book unpacks the myths, legends, and surprising truths behind this legendary order. Whether you know the Templars from Dan Brown's novels Assassin's Creed or Monty Python, no holy hand grenades here though. This discussion promises to separate fact from fiction and maybe raise a few eyebrows along the way. So buckle up as we uncover the real story behind those famous white mantles with red crosses. Steve Tibble, welcome to the show. Before we dive into the details, could you start by telling us a bit about your book and what drew you to research the Templars, particularly their presence and influence in Britain?
I did my PhD largely on the military orders, you know, the Templars and the Hospitallers primarily back in the 1980s, and published a little book with Oxford on that at the time. Now, the last few years, I've been working on two different aspects, actually. Criminality. I've just written a book called Crusader Criminals, which looks at the kind of social mayhem that you get around pirates and gangsters. But I've also spent a lot of time looking at the Templars and, the way in which they've been misinterpreted by the modern world. And I think hopefully we'll come onto it later, but there's this whole world of craziness around the internet and around our own problems and preoccupations. And I think that the wonderful and scary thing about the Templars is they're very much a blank piece of paper, and we impose our own dreams and fears and nightmares onto them. And so it's an amazingly topical subject.
Steve, could you tell us about the formation of the British Templars and how their challenges differed from those faced by their counterparts in other regions?
So the Templars were pretty much set up to create the kind of something that would be almost like a standing army. And as you can imagine, medieval Europe hadn't seen a standing army since the Roman legions. So the Templars were an amazingly imaginative idea to help defend the Holy Land. The downside was these are very unproductive societies. You know, they're very basic societies. So the logistics of maintaining a standing army anywhere, let alone on the wild edges of Europe, were incredibly difficult. So as well as having the lads on the ground with castles and mercenaries and armies in the Middle East, there had to be a whole infrastructure in Europe to provide support. You know, that support might be money, it might be lobbying, it might be logistics or whatever. And that's where you find the British Templars come to the fore alongside all their other, comrades in other countries. And I think every country had its own problems. Although they're a kind of an international order and they're working for the papacy and they're working for an international ideal and an international military requirement, they have to fit in with the local politics. So all the time, what you see with the British Templars are continually trying to make themselves useful. It's probably better to think of them as kind of peacemongers in the West, even though they kind of got a reputation as warmongers in the East, which is, not unwarranted. So you have this kind of strange binary tension. So in Britain, they're doing everything they can to make sure that England and Scotland and Ireland are all peaceful, not because they're Mother Teresa. They're not doing this for altruistic reasons. They're doing it because they want Britain to be able to send volunteers and money to help the crusading cause in the Middle East. And that causes a lot of different tensions as you go through British history, really, and they have to adapt to the idiosyncrasies of every king or every queen that comes along, and to make sure that they're being useful, but not totally compromising their ideals.
Interestingly, in the book, you discuss how torture was used in France, but not in Britain against the Templars. How did this difference impact the charges and myths that subsequently followed?
Yeah, I think it's fundamental. That's a very good point. Basically, once the Holy Land had fallen and the Templars were redundant, they were quite vulnerable. They were too arrogant to realize that, but they were actually very vulnerable. And the King of France, Philip, basically used it as an opportunity to close down the operation. And I think people have argued a lot about what his motives were. Other people have said, well, he's genuinely very short of cash and needs to do a bit of robbery, and I'd say that's 100% possible. Interestingly, just in case you ever thought that torture was a good idea, and it's not, obviously not many people do, but just in case you thought it was useful, say from an anti-terrorist perspective, this is a really good case study on why it doesn't work. So it's very interesting. After the Templars get arrested, first thing they do is to start torturing everybody. And they put a set of crazy questions to them. Absolute mad stuff, like that you're actually running a satanic cult, that you urinate on the cross, that you kick the crucifix around the room, that you do ghastly things with animals. And the French brothers, by and large, confess to all this. In reality, all the charges are false. And the reason is exactly what you said. It's the T word, torture. Tens, maybe hundreds of them died under torture rather than perjure themselves. But the ones who did confess did so under the most horrendous conditions. In places like Britain and Cyprus as well, for instance, where there isn't a history of torture, you get quite different results. So in the English Crown, for instance, judges tended not to be appointed by the king, so they were slightly more independent. There was more reliance on outrageous things like having a jury and relying on little bits of evidence, that kind of thing, and they weren't allowed to be tortured. So every single Templar in Britain didn't confess. All of this satanic stuff, no one confessed to any of it because it wasn't true. They had no idea what they were even being asked about, really. Whereas in somewhere like France, you torture enough people, everybody's going to confess to everything. So to me, it's just pretty much black and white there.
You mentioned how clerical errors like misreading Catum as Catilium led to bizarre myths like calf worship in Yorkshire. How do such small details evolve into widespread legends?
Yeah, you're right. It's great to see that north of England's coming into its own there. I love the way that a small detail can just unravel an elaborate conspiracy. And this little detail, I think, is fabulous because it does help to blow it all apart. So you've got this big totalitarian machine that's effectively launching it's like a piece of market research in its attempt to destroy a group of vulnerable people and steal their money. And all over Europe, the brothers were being questioned and they were being asked about why they were licking cats' bottoms. So this is clearly a crazy thing. I think the inquisitors realized that's what heretics and Satan worshippers do. They kiss cats' bottoms, obviously, because that's what else are you going to do on a Saturday night? But in Yorkshire, there was literally a clerical error. And the dear cleric there managed to get a couple of things wrong. But the biggest one was, instead of catum, which is as in licking the bottom of a cat, witnesses there were told to talk about licking calves' bottoms, catellum, which clearly makes no sense. Obviously none of it makes any sense, but there's there's an infinitesimally tiny, small chance there might be a cat in a church and that a monk might lick its bottom. Obviously hideously unlikely, especially pre-internet days, but it is slightly more plausible. But then the idea that you're actually going to get a calf coming in, you've actually got a cow in the church and everybody's, wandering around thinking, what are we going to do to this cow next? It's just completely crazy. And it really does show how fake it all was. Because as a piece of market research, you're sitting down with these guys and saying, okay, so thinking about licking cows' bottoms, do you kiss cows' bottoms frequently? Neither frequently nor infrequently, not frequently. It is like somebody stopping you on the street and talking to you about baked beans. And they're ticking these boxes, trying to find which bit of heresy they can trip you up on. Funnily enough, the same clerical error in Yorkshire was repeated later on. There was another question about secrecy, because if you're having a satanic sect, you clearly don't want to do it in public. Obviously, we've all been there. So they asked people about whether they had these meetings de nocte, at night. But the Yorkshire lad misspelt it. So he wrote de vocte, which means with devotion. So the guys in Yorkshire were asked, did you have these meetings devotedly, with devotion? And people would turn around and say, well, yes, I thought we were supposed to. We're a religious order, but nobody, even the inquisitors, didn't know what to make of the answer because they weren't asking the right question. But it's like tearing the veil away. Once you've torn the veil away from the questioning and the methodology, you can see what a complete sham it is. And it's much easier to see the sham through the trivia of somebody making a human error on the edge of the process, and suddenly the whole process unravels in front of you. It says a lot about the craziness of totalitarianism and torture.
Modern culture has revived Templar conspiracy theories. How have these shaped public perception, especially regarding the British Templars? What does this tell us about our relationship with history, Steve?
Yeah, it's good and bad. I think a lot of it is bad. You look, you just search Templars on the internet and like images, and you get a wall of madness just coming straight at you within seconds. Some of it has become quite politicized, particularly towards more right-wing groups. And there's an element of a racist reinterpretation going on in Eastern Europe and some other parts of the world, where people try and reinterpret the Templars as being white supremacists, and they're kind of twisting the idea of an elite military group, which is true, into this kind of racist elite group, which is very much not true at all. We think a lot about racism now, but people in the Middle Ages, much less so. There's amazingly little racism in the Crusades. People are much more interested in ideas and religious and superstitions rather than race or skin color. There are some exceptions, but by and large, most of the guys serving in Templar armies out in the Middle East probably were not Europeans. They were probably local Christian Arabs, local Christian Syrians, local Armenians. The majority of the population were Christian, but they weren't white. So the irony is that Templar troops on the ground would probably white guys were in a minority, so there are no way they're not white supremacists. But from a modern perspective, you can twist that. I think there's a kind of a positive side to it, which is not getting enough attention, which is that I think the Templars are people who strove for excellence and who got up every morning and did a lot with very little. So I think, we all try and achieve things, and we go in pursuit of excellence in our own ways. And I always find the Templars very inspirational from that sense. But I have to say, I think the crazy side totally outnumbers the more, sedate version. I think particularly in America and the UK, there is a bit of a divide, because I think in America, people want more to kind of invent a past, because American history on the ground, certainly from a European perspective, is more limited. You find there's a lot of movement towards trying to incorporate the Templars into a rewritten past, rewriting our medieval history of America, associating them with the Vikings and transatlantic travel and so on, which I have to say I find very unlikely.
Do you think popular culture like Dan Brown's novels or video games like Assassin's Creed is more helpful or harmful when it comes to educating people about the Templars?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd make a really clear distinction between people who try and pervert history for conspiracies and sometimes for political racist reasons, and people who use it for entertainment and fun. And, so like Dan Brown, take Dan Brown. He's sort of responsible for a lot of the Templar stuff. But in fairness to him, he wasn't writing a lecture series. He never pretended it was true. It's a work of fiction. And, you have to respect that. So, Rosslyn and the New Temple feature in that. And good luck to him. It's a work of fiction. I've got no problem with that. And it's the same with Assassin's Creed. I think you're absolutely right. It introduces a fun view of the medieval world. It introduces some characters that are actually historical characters in a fantasized way. Like there is one of the Templar masters, actually a British one, Robert de Sablé, appears in Assassin's Creed, and he interacting with the assassins. I'm writing a book which Yale are going to be publishing next year called Assassins and Templars. And because the assassins actually have exactly the same, or very similar kind of legend mythology issues that the Templars do. And they did have a real relationship together. That's the other thing that people don't realize about Assassin's Creed is, the Templars and the assassins, they're in the Chronicles. The Templars were the landlords for the assassins, in many ways. They're both kind of crazy groups, but they did also know that the assassins had to pay their rent like everybody else, and so you do find some really crazy mashups between the two. It's going to be my kind of aliens versus predators look at the Middle Ages there. But no, I personally I think it's a good thing to introduce kids to medieval history and the past from an early age, and as they get older, they get more and more inclined, either they leave it behind or they get more inclined to look at it from a historical perspective. But either way, it's either good fun or it's leading you into good history. No problem at all with that.
Thank you, Steve Tibble, for coming on the show. You can find Steve Tibble's book and keep an eye out for his upcoming work through Yale University Press. Thanks for tuning in. This has been Jack Clark for Arts Express with host Prairie Miller.
I sent pictures to my sister. I sent pictures of the campground. I sent a couple pictures of the camper. She wrote back, "You lost your mind."
Well, we've been here for 21 years, and I'm sick that they're going to tear this place down, and every place in here, everybody's sick.
We've met such nice people. Oh my gosh, that's going to be the hard part.
Hi, this is Jack Shalom. Ever since I was a child, the summer meant freedom and joy, and summer's end was always bittersweet. Now, Amy Nicholson captures that feeling even into adulthood with her new documentary, Happy Campers. Amy Nicholson is also the filmmaker of another of my favorite summer-themed documentaries, Zipper, Coney Island's Last Wild Ride. So I'm happy to have as my guest writer, director, and cinematographer, Amy Nicholson. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Jack. Thank you for having me. This is so nice.
Amy, I really enjoyed your film. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, it's a feature-length documentary, and it's about a summer colony down in Chincoteague Island, Virginia. And it's a fishing community, and during the summer it turns into, a family vacation spot. So they have family campgrounds on Chincoteague, and there are a couple of them, and one of them was called Inlet View. And I wandered into Inlet View one day taking photographs and thought, wow, there's all of these tiny houses, but they're really campers that people had added onto and decorated. And I went back many years later and decided that I had to know what went on in that community. And so I moved in. So Happy Campers is the chronicle of the final summer of Inlet View.
Well, what made you want to make this film?
When I first went in there, I thought, wow, this is going to be a great portrait of community. And I moved in and I didn't do any filming. I just made friends and had fun. And then when I finally got around to start shooting, we all got a letter saying that developers were circling the field and they were looking at the property and that it might already be in contract. And that broke my heart. So I started filming it in earnest, thinking, well, if the deal does go through, somebody needs to know how wonderful this place is. Because, it wasn't much to look at. It was a little, you would say, scrappy. You might say shabby. You might say it was claptrap. And I think that allowed people to dismiss it as, kind of that, oh, that janky campground down the road, but it was magical.
Well, I have to say that at first I thought this was going to be a film that, well, kind of poked fun at these people who spent their summers smoking and drinking and living in little trailers. And there's got to be more smoking in this film than any other film made in this century. But I found I got caught and embarrassed by my own prejudices and came to see the humanity that was in each one of these people.
Oh, well, Jack, I'm sorry for that, but it's wonderful that you say that because we did that on purpose. We absolutely set out to change the viewer's mind from the beginning to the end. And hopefully by the time you get to the end of the first act, you're thinking, well, that looks kind of fun. Maybe I could do that,
The movie kind of sneaks up on you. It's very leisurely paced. You don't force anything, and you just let the events gently unfold. You let people speak for themselves. When you start off deciding to make a documentary, it's kind of a risky proposition, isn't it? You don't know where it's going to end up when you begin, do you?
No, I knew at some point in this process that we would all have to leave, myself included. I would have to pack up my camper and my camera and get out. But I did not know really what I had until I came home. And I filmed the last summer was 2019. And then, in 2020, we all went into lockdown. So I had a lot of time to kind of look at the footage and really think about it and really consider why was I so much happier there than I ever was anywhere else. And I realized that it was the people that made me so happy. And I wanted to share that with the world.
Tell us about some of the people so that the listeners can get a sense of who we encountered.
Oh, okay. Well, in the film, the first two people you meet are school teachers, Brett and Allison, and they were one of the younger couples because there were quite a few retirees. Brett started coming there when he was a kid, and it was his grandfather's place. And then it got passed on to his parents and then to him. And he and his wife, Allison, would come every summer and spend the entire summer with their kids. And those kids weren't on screens. They weren't looking at cell phones. They were playing in the water. They were learning to crab and fish and to talk to people. And so they were really wonderful neighbors. I had great neighbors on either side of me. And on one side was Chris and Mary, and they had a big giant peace sign on their camper. So, I would just go over to their house and my husband would say, well, I'll see you in 3 hours because Mary and I can talk up a storm. Oh, Coley and Gary and Anna. And there's so many great people.
While I was watching this, I was thinking about that another filmmaker might have structured this film a little differently in that we would see the people coming from the different states driving to this summer place. And then at the end, we'd see them going back home to their homes and we'd get to know more about their lives outside of this summer camp. And you don't do that. And I thought that was really interesting.
Oh, thank you. Well, there were many, many suggestions to that effect, Jack. But the biggest one was, well, where do they live and what is their life outside of that community? And to me, it didn't matter. The community itself was such a bubble. And once you were in there, that was your world for however long you were there, whether you lived there full time, whether you came for, one big 2-week blast in the summer, or whether you were a weekender or whether you were a snowbird. There were retirees that came, right around Easter and didn't leave until Thanksgiving. But when you were there, you were in there.
You made us one of the summer people by stripping that context away.
Yes.
Well, it is a beautiful story of human community, but there's also a subtle but deep political subtext underneath of how even simple pleasures are being uprooted by powerful moneyed forces. Most of the people that you showed are kind of outwardly philosophical about the way things turn out, but underneath there's this burning anger and hatred of what's happening to them. How do you see that in the light of the political polarization that's happening in this country?
Well, I do know that the corporatization that is happening, which is neither left nor right, that there are things that should be honored that don't have a monetary value. So simple pleasures like being able to make a campfire or just having a place that is affordable enough that you can kind of make it your own. A place that you can come if you don't make a ton of money where people aren't going to look down on you. And also just the friendliness and the neighborliness of the community there. Those things have huge value to people's lives, but there's no monetary upside to them, right? Like you can't cash in on them. So it's very sad to me. And I purposely do not show what ended up on that same spot because it is very corporate and very sterile. But no matter who you're going to vote for, that is the problem with everything, is that fabric of American life, and it's not just this community, there are communities like this in all kinds of places. That sort of social life where people knew their neighbors and sat around and talked, and it vanishes because of corporate greed. I don't address politics in that way in the film because politics was never discussed at the campground because it's not polite.
For me, your film helped me sort of crystallize what the problem with the polarization that we see in politics today is. I mean, I'm sure some of those people at that campground are going to vote for Trump, but they also are hugely disaffected and they know the system isn't working for them, and they may not come to the same answers that I may come to. But I think it really helped me recognize what's going on out there. People are feeling like they can't even have simple pleasures anymore, that they can't
That's right.
own anything.
That's exactly right. When people do ask me about it because they make assumptions, yes, there were some people who voted for Trump and would vote again. There were some people who voted for him and would never vote for him again. And then there were just people who I just thought, wow, they're just trying to feed their kids. So that's why I say there's something bigger that's getting lost. And my ability to go to my neighbors and talk to Mary for 3 hours about absolutely nothing is part of that. It's priceless. You cannot put a price tag on it.
I want to just dig into this a little bit more. I mean, you do show that one scene where the woman is very, very angry that she's being forced to leave, and she says, I'm gonna rip everything up and not leave anything behind for anybody to make money off me. Every day in big cities, people are threatened with eviction, but they resist, they protest, they strike. Sometimes they even win. Was there any of that there? Any movement to try and stop what seemed inevitable?
There was some, because of course I was thinking, well, we should have a co-op, we should all band together and pool our money. And first of all, there was no time. The developer was very quiet about what their plans were and sent the letter. I would say maybe the front office, they would try to make sure everyone got one by, I would say July 4th, And then by that time, you're halfway in the summer and you're just trying to get your stuff packed, and they gave us a very strict deadline and said, that's it. And you have to get out. So really the time was the bigger issue. I think it's just sad that, the campers were mostly older and they had grown roots, so to speak. And so most of them couldn't be moved. So that was really a heartbreaking thing. But to go back to, what you were saying, I was really struck by how so many people said these words to me. Well, this is what happens to the little people. This is what happens to people like us. This is our lot in life, essentially. The working class guy gets screwed, but most people would say to me, wow, I had 20 years of this. Can you imagine? I'm so lucky. I don't want to sound like an old fart, but I gotta say, there's a lot of things that I feel like are not appreciated, that are small and not perfect and not branded. Everything is so branded now. I started to feel that way just watching the Olympics. Yeah, there is something that's getting lost, and I hope I can bottle some of it.
Well, that's interesting you say about bottling it, because someone once said about folk singer Gordon Lightfoot that his songs make me remember something that never happened to me.
Oh,
And
I love that.
Isn't that great?
I
feel
love that.
Yeah, I feel the same way about your film. It made me nostalgic for a way of life that I actually never experienced. I mean, I may have had analogs to it. When I watched it the first time, by the end I was sobbing. It really hit me hard. And I think it's a beautiful film. Any last words that you'd like to say about the film?
I guess I would just say our assumptions that come from just taking a look at someone and assuming you know what the rest of their life is. And I would just say, keep an open mind, because I am always amazed and surprised at how I feel about the people I meet after spending a lot of time with them. And so I just hope people will check their divisive craziness or whatever we're going through right now at the door and really just enjoy the people that they meet.
Well, thanks so much, Amy. I've been talking with filmmaker Amy Nicholson about her new documentary, Happy Campers, a beautifully crafted film that I think you will really appreciate. This is Jack Shalom for Arts Express with host Prairie Miller.
And that's all we have time for today on Arts Express, expression in the arts. And if you'd like to express yourself too, you can write to us at theradiogoddess@gmail.com. Until next time, this is Prairie Miller leaving the station.